Low emission zones are a strategy used for increasing the air quality of cities or other areas with high traffic by excluding older vehicles that produce a higher level of pollutants. In June 2023, a low emission zone was officially introduced in Glasgow, with any driver failing to comply with these restrictions being fined. To learn more about these zones, I decided to talk to John Thorne, the Sustainability Coordinator at the Glasgow School of Art.
Things like low emission zones are really interesting because they have more than one effect on society. And the idea is to get a healthier environment for people and hopefully reduce the amount of traffic as well, whilst keeping access to the city. I think there's good evidence across Europe that low emission zones do work. I think somehow perhaps they have the wrong name. Perhaps we should call them healthy living zones rather than low emission zones, because it's all about people's health. And we're just seeing a lot of benefits for people living in the city, being able to breathe cleaner air. And I think that's what will happen in Glasgow as well. We'll have a cleaner environment to live in, which I think is a good thing.
As with any new thing, there will be critics. There is a large group adamantly opposed to these low emission zones. On the 20th of January, I attended a low emission zone protest held in Glasgow's town centre. To understand why they were so opposed to these zones, I reached out to one of the event organisers, Chris McDougall.
Obviously it was put in for air quality, and we all want clean air. But I think you'd have to prove with beyond reasonable doubt that the area that you put it in qualifies as bad air quality. And I don't think that's been discussed. I don't think it was really put to a national discussion. And it wasn't actually put into lower carbon emissions, which you wouldn't expect it to do, because a lot of people have said they have to drive further to get from what was point A to point B, which is now A, B, C, D, back to, because it can't go through the city centre. I think people look at our groups and think you don't care about climate, you don't care about anything, you don't care about air quality. It's like, well, a lot of us do, and would probably agree that there's areas in Britain or Scotland or whatever that there's a real discussion to be had. I wouldn't go with zones like that at all, but I think there's areas to look at. So we're not all just, I think people like to think we all just hate the air. We're anti-air. It's like, no. I think it's just an extreme reaction to a misdiagnosed problem.
Understand why people are a bit cautious about low emission zones, because it affects people's wallets and it affects people's ability to just go anywhere they want in their car. So I know people who've had to give up older cars and buy newer cars, and that's difficult to afford. Roads are a class issue, because if you live near a road, you're much more likely to get sort of affected by the fumes that come from roads, and you're much less likely to own a car. So half of the households in Glasgow don't own a car. And in Glasgow, when you look at the motorways, what you see is housing probably for poorer parts of Glasgow, and the motorways go through these areas, whereas they don't tend to go through the richer areas of Glasgow. And it affects people's ability to just go anywhere they want in their car. We think of the freedom of the road, but every time I cross the M8, it seems to be doing about 20 miles an hour. So I think the freedom of road may be a bit of a mystical thing.
Talking with Chris, I realised his criticisms are mainly rooted in anti-establishment sentiment.
I don't think a government should be able to limit some people's travel and not others. I don't think that should be within a government's boundaries. I do see implications in them putting low emission zones that it could lead to other things. From the sort of causes that I've been involved with, we would see it as a continuation of sort of government overreach. The last few years especially, severe lockdown, and then even after that, whatever you think about the sort of COVID era, if you think it was bigged up too much or if it was a serious thing we had to watch out for, they've actually escalated the amount of control they've put over the public since that time, which for me and people in sort of the causes that I'm involved with, we expected this. At the same time, the councils are openly talking about 20-minute cities or 15-minute cities, to call it down south, which sounds like a nice idea, but when will it become mandatory? And some people might think that's tin hat approach, but I mean, I think it's kind of consistent with how governments behaved in the last few years, that they want to increase the amount of control. If you give them a little inch, they'll take a mile. So I think, yeah, I think it'll escalate to more restrictions and more restrictions until there's no cars in Glasgow and there's no business in Glasgow.
So cities are about people, not cars for me. And in any average city, 70% of the space that's not taken by buildings will be for cars. So if you look around Glasgow and you look down even Renfrew Street outside this building, you'll see a road full of parked cars, and that's space that's not useful for people. So amazingly, the average car in the UK doesn't move for 95% of the time. So that's a waste of economic resources, it's a waste of my money, because every moment that car is sitting there, it's actually depreciating in value. So there's lots of economic, environmental and social reasons, and when we start joining those things up, they start getting, I think, really interesting, and we can start taking the people who do object to low emission zones and the people in favour and actually start talking about that. And I think it should be a democratic process, and I think Glasgow should decide what it wants to do. Does it want health, does it want good access, or does it want to continue as it is?